Hello, welcome to week 2 of cognitive development. Today we're going to learn more about Piaget and Vygotsky. They are really the two most influential cognitive theorists that we look at when we decide about early childhood development. And I'm going to share my screen and have a PowerPoint to share with you. This is also posted on our Blackboard page. So let's just review it briefly. When it comes to cognitive development, constructivism, which is Piaget's theory, is the one that really most closely describes how children learn and develop. Constructivist theory holds that children construct knowledge and understanding and creativity through their active experiences and problem solving. Children have to be active learners in order to build their understandings. That means they can't just sit at a desk and do a worksheet. That's not considered an active learning experience. There are actually 4 stages to Piaget's theory. The first one is the sensory motor stage. The second one is pre-operational. The third one is operational, and then comes formal operational. We'll talk a little bit more about each one of those. The sensory motor stage is really between 0 and 2, but this is a really flexible. There are some 3-year-olds who are still clearly in this stage, and then maybe there's some 1.5-year-olds who are not so much in this stage. It's very flexible, so don't use this as a hard cutoff. During the sensory motor stage, children use their senses to construct new knowledge. Notice that this child in the video is using her hand to touch the bubbles and the water and understand the properties of bubbles and water. This is how she is creating her understandings. At this particular age, children are very egocentric. The world is all about them, very much centralized. That's normal. So think about this. You've got a classroom full of 2-year-olds. They're all very egocentric. The world is all about them. Developmentally, think about how this would affect your classroom dynamics. And then think about ways in which early childhood teachers can help children to de-center, to think about others, to learn how to be empathetic, to learn about caring how others feel. Those are all very important strategies for early childhood teachers to work on in the classroom so that children build that knowledge that others do have feelings and others can be hurt by what you do to them. The next stage is, we're still on the sensory motor stage. Sensory motor stage is also the time when children develop object permanence. Until they've really gotten object permanence, they think if an object is gone from in front of them, it's gone forever, which is really one reason that young children get so upset when, say, their parent leaves. They drop them off at daycare and they leave, and the child is inconsolable. It's because that young child assumes that parent's never coming back. Because once that object is out of sight, not coming back, until they realize that even when something is gone from sight, it's not gone permanently. Then comes the pre-operational stage, and we're talking somewhere between 2 and 7, very flexible. You will see children in this stage in your pre-K classroom. They may be in your kindergarten classroom. They may even be in your 1st and 2nd grade classroom. Pre-operational. These children are very active learners. They have to touch it, feel it, taste it, smell it, hear it in order for them to learn from it. They use language to communicate. pre-operational stage. Sometime during the end of this stage, they do use symbols to represent knowledge. They learn how to write their name. They may learn how to write some numbers and some other letters besides what is in their name. They begin to decenter, but don't have too high an expectation. I can assure you that when I taught my first grade classroom, my 6 and 7-year-olds were still working on decentering. The world very much revolved around them most of the time. They oftentimes rely on perception rather than logic. Think about this group is, they're firm believers in the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus, and perception rather than logic. Next comes the concrete operational stage. This is right around 7 to 11. Again, the ages are quite flexible. And you have some logical thought processes. They begin to figure things out. This is a time when children will often look at you and say, okay, so now is my grandma my mother's mom? And is my aunt my mother's sister? And what about my uncle? How is he related to me? They're trying to make logical sense of the world around them rather than just accepting what is. They also begin to learn some processes such as conservation, classification, and seriation. So when children learn to conserve, what they're doing is they're recognizing that properties are the same, regardless of position or shape or grouping. When you have a glass that's half full of water, and you pour that same amount of water into a vase that's larger, and it looks like just a little bit in the vase, and then you say, which one of these has more and which one has less water? And children that cannot conserve will say, oh, the glass, look, there's so much more water in that glass. Where a child that does conserve will say, well, you poured the same amount into the vase, so it's got to be the same. That's the difference between children who can conserve and those who can't. And then comes the classification. Children that can classify are able to sort. They can sort for maybe just one characteristic, or maybe 2 or 3 or 4. Maybe they can sort by color. If you give them blocks in all different shapes and sizes and colors, they might put all the red blocks in one corner and the yellow blocks in another corner and the green blocks in another corner. Doesn't matter what shape it is or size, just color. The older children get, the more able they are to sort by different characteristics. You might have children that sort all the red square blocks in one corner and all the red rectangular blocks in another corner and all the triangular shaped red blocks in another corner. So they can actually sort for 3 characteristics. Or they might have all the red triangles that are small in one corner and the red triangles that are large in another corner, even more characteristics, size and shape and color. So it does get more complex as children get older. They're also able to match. You can play matching games with them. You can classify by multiple attributes. They recognize patterns. We do patterning in school. We've got the AB, 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 ABB, ABBC, so on and so forth. They also, as they get older, are able to sort numbers according to whether they're odd, even, and then going further, negative numbers and positive numbers. Seriating is the ability to group based on a certain characteristic. For instance, you might be able to seriate paint chips by color, darkness to lightness. Or you might be able to seriate your students from the tallest to the shortest. Or you may be able to seriate rocks from the heaviest to the lightest. Or you might be able to seriate by importance, like what is the most important thing for living beings to have in order to remain alive? Well, we'd probably say air. So that might be the most important. And then what's next important? Well, we might say water. Okay, so then we list water, and then we might say, well, what's next? Someone would probably say food, and we'd say food. And we go down the importance chain. That's seriation. So then we move on to the next stage, which is formal operations. And that is from right around 11 to 12 into adulthood. We're all still in that stage. We are able to think abstractly. We're able to hypothesize. And we are just able to think at a higher level. Piaget believed children learn through adaptation. They are constantly adapting to their environment through their own interactions with the environment. And he coined the term schema. Schema is the organization, the structure that children create in their own brains that helps them organize their experiences. I always think of it as a chest of drawers. They have a chest of drawers for dogs, and what dogs are supposed to look like, and what they're supposed to do, and what they sound like, and what they feel like. They might have another chest of drawers up there for transportation. And they have everything that they know about transportation in there, and what it looks like and sounds like and what it does, and so on and so forth. Now, in order to organize these drawers, it's done through adaptation. Every time you have a new experience, they're constructing new knowledge about that experience. And this schema change that they're changing in here, putting their new experiences in, is called adaptation. And adaptation occurs in two different ways, depending on the experience. It's assimilation or accommodation. So assimilation occurs, excuse me, when a learner is confronted with new knowledge, but it's kind of familiar. They already got a drawer that's got information that's similar. Say, for instance, you got a 2-year-old. The 2-year-old has a dog, it's a collie at home. And then mom takes him to the park and he sees a lady with a Cocker Spaniel. Well, the Cocker Spaniel looks different from the collie, but he's barking and he's on a leash. And when the lady lets him pet the Cocker Spaniel, he's really soft, just like the collie. Fur is very soft. And you know what? He licks his face just like their collie does at home. So assimilation of, oh, this is a dog. Even though he's different from my dog, that information goes into the drawer. Not all dogs look the same. They're not all collies. It's different but familiar. Say, for instance, you as an adult, you use a PC when you come to school or when you go to work, in the in the computer lab or at work. And then you go to Walmart and you buy yourself a laptop to use to do your homework. Well, you already know what the keyboard looks like, and you know how to, access things on the internet and get on your email. You've got all that basic information. You're going to probably have to do a little bit of relearning to learn how to use it on your laptop. It'll take you a day or two, but it's so familiar. You've got a drawer up here with all computer information already inside it that you're adding to that drawer. You're not creating any new drawers. You're just tucking in a few things. On my computer, I've got to hit this button to turn it on, and then I've got to do it this way. So there you have it. Nothing brand new. It's just a little different. But then we go from assimilation, which is just a little different, to accommodation. Accommodation has to happen when the learner is confronted with new information that does not fit into any current ways of thinking. There's no drawer upstairs for what you're seeing. It's brand new. Say, for instance, you've got a 2-year-old who has the collie at home, and mom takes him to the circus and he sees an elephant for the first time. Well, my gosh, there's no drawer up here for elephant. You've got a whole new schema that has to be written for that. That is called accommodation. Same thing happens to an adult. Say you have an adult who's old school and they've been using a typewriter all this time. And then they decide they've had enough with that old typewriter, and they go to Walmart and buy themselves a laptop or a PC. First time ever. Okay. Can you imagine that experience? There's no drawer up here for laptop or PC. You're all new information. Lots of new learning. Takes quite a while to build that drawer of information. That's called accommodation. Assimilation is super easy because it's already familiar. Accommodation is harder because it's not familiar. So Piaget tells us that there are 3 kinds of knowledge that children learn about. The first kind is physical knowledge, and that's just about how does the ball roll when your 1-year-old sits in the high chair and keeps dropping their spoon to the floor. They are working on their physical knowledge. They're really not trying to just annoy you the whole time with that, but physical knowledge. When I drop this spoon, it falls to the floor and it goes plink, plink. That's learning about physical knowledge. There's also logical mathematical knowledge, and not logical mathematical is the knowledge that's sort of relationships. This is heavier than that. This color is lighter than that. This is taller than that. And then you notice that for physical knowledge, you have to interact with the item. There's no way you can just read about it and gain this knowledge. Same thing with logical mathematical. Nobody ever got any logical mathematical knowledge just by reading a book. However, social conventional knowledge is shared between people by using language. For instance, just language themselves is learned through social interaction. Children learn language by being with their family. Names for the letters of the alphabet are shared through language. Colors, what we name our colors, is shared through language. The names for the days of the week, the months of the year, and the seasons, all transmitted through social interaction. Rituals such as the flag salute are learned through social interaction in school. The meanings of stoplights, social interaction. Someone told you what that meant. So this is really the very basic framework of Piaget's theory of constructivism. And I'm just giving you the very, very basic framework. Our textbook has a lot more detailed, good information, so make sure you read that as well. I can assure you that there were quite a few questions on the last OSAT I took, which was quite recently, on Piaget. Make sure you are well-versed in Piaget and his theory. But we do have another important constructivist, and that is Lev Vygotsky. He is really right up there. He basically is the same kind of constructivist as Piaget, but he is a step further because he came up with the sociocultural theory of development. He believed that children not only construct knowledge by doing, they also construct knowledge through social interactions and their cultural environment. And that makes a great deal of sense because children in different parts of the world construct different kinds of social knowledge. And then they use that social knowledge in order to build their cognitive abilities. So let's look at this more closely. The zone of proximal development, that's something that Vygotsky came up with. The zone is a point at which the child can perform a challenging task with appropriate help. And this is so important for teachers to know. Know exactly where your student is at, and then take them a little bit further on. We all need to know where that child's zone of development is. In contrast, Piaget would consider the task to be out of the child's mental capabilities if they were unable to complete it on their own. But Vygotsky felt it was important for adults and teachers purposefully to make the task a little bit more difficult than the child could do on their own, and then guide them through that task in order for them to learn at a higher level. Vygotsky also wrote about scaffolding, which means give the learner some hints, scaffold them, move them up the ladder of problem solving in order to allow them to learn how to approach problems in the future. So think about in your own classroom, when children do not understand a concept or how to work something, and you're scaffolding them, you might be asking them questions that would guide them along the process and make them consider it themselves, or you might give them hints and cues. Whatever it is, we do scaffold children as they are working on problems. Vygotsky believed that language development is a major principle of socio-cultural development. And he also believed that the language of a certain group of people indicates their cultural beliefs and value system. And it certainly does, because that's how people share their values and their culture. Vygotsky came up with the term private speech, which is that self-talk. Have you ever sat in a room and just watched one child alone playing? And if you listen carefully, you can hear that child talking to themselves. They're building their knowledge. Adults do this all the time. When they're working on something that's difficult, have you ever brought home a new piece of equipment and caught yourself reading the instructions out loud? Yeah, we do that because when we hear it, it becomes easier. Now, Piaget, on the other hand, he viewed private speech as being egocentric and immature. So I guess that makes most of us that because we all do it. And another cognitive theorist is B.F. Skinner. He is known as a behaviorist. He is a cognitive theorist, but he is a behaviorist because he believes that learning occurs as a direct result of conditioning reinforcement, and or punishment, also known as operant conditioning. As for example, if we, let's see, if we punish children enough for doing something, then that will automatically make them stop doing it. We know that doesn't really work, does it? Let's see, if we give children a cookie every time they make 100 on a spelling test, then we'll just keep giving them that cookie, and that will make them make 100 on the spelling test. That's not, that reasoning does not work. Operant conditioning is often used in schools. When you walk in and you see the gold stars for the 100 on the spelling test, that's supposed to be encouragement to make everyone else get 100 on the spelling test. I don't think so. The same kind of operant conditioning is in process when you see children that have to sit on the next to the fence rather than play at recess for some infraction that occurred in the classroom that morning. The theory behind that is, well, if we make them sit on the fence today, then tomorrow they'll behave when they're in the classroom because they know what the punishment is. Well, the problem with that is that they will have forgotten. By the time most of the children sit down at the fence in the afternoon, they have forgotten what they did in the morning because they're children. And they just assume they're being punished for whatever, but they don't really remember what it is. Operant conditioning. And then there's Albert Bandura. He is also a behaviorist. And he came up with the social learning theory, believing that behavior is learned through observation, imitation, and modeling. And it definitely is, to a certain extent. One only has to look at little boys out on the playground, pretending they're superheroes. Where did they see that? Could it have been that it was modeled on the cartoon they watched last night? People do learn by modeling, imitation, and observation. And sometimes it's not what you want them to learn. So let's just take a look at play, since we've talked about cognitive development, and I know there is some discussion of play at the end of this chapter as well. There is functional play, which allows children and infants to find out what they can do with objects. You see children doing the rattle, rattle, rattle because they can hear the noise. It has a function. Every time I move it, it rattles. Same thing with the hammer. Every time you whack that little rod, it goes lower, lower, lower. So there's a function. There's constructive play, and children learn through all types of play. So it's important to know the different types of play for cognitive development. Constructive play, children use objects to create something in their imagination. The focus is on constructing an end product. Notice the little girl making her tower, and then the older child put together a car of some kind. There's symbolic play, where an item represents something else. When I do this, my hand is a symbol for a telephone. Symbolic play. Children might put a block up to their ear and say, hello, hello. It's a symbol. And then there are games with rules as they get older. And that is that. Okay. And I really like this quote by Piaget. We definitely want to educate a new generation that is capable of doing new